I don't know how long I'm here.
in our parents' interest to do it all for you. That's
Oh,
thug
this
life.
works.
You get your
Sorry
own
about
life.
that.
You got to do it actually yourself. And in that process, though, they're going to assist you in doing it because that's what parents do. So, again, that's why I'm like, I'm just letting this breathe because I already know the power behind or in front of what exactly is coming through. And I'm just like, okay, let me see how much of the weight has to move through in order for the technical difficulties to move out of the way. In fact, let me open up my servers here 1 second and increase the bandwidth.
Hi.
And so I'm gonna keep going. So the first
Oh shit.
answer for you really briefly because y'all know like I've always been on my show titles. It's like I guess that's the reason why I have the low amount of subscribers. The title of my show will be like Cold Woman and the Universal Mother. Like nobody Googles for that. So tonight is Masters of the Waveform. So someone may say, what is a master of the waveform? And I will say tonight, the most important thing that you would need to realize about them is that to manipulate or master the waveform is actually to be able to change how things are perceived by others, by onlookers. Okay? I remember one time in Heroes, there was this one dude, the heavy set dude, and his power was he could just grab people, right? And then he could like get into another reality or whatever. So when people would come in, they would not even see him and whoever he was enveloping with this perception. Or actually, he was also even changing the perception of everybody that was in that room so that they wouldn't actually see them there. So this is master of a waveform type of stuff. It's actually, it gets into more, and I'm going to explain it in detail here, but it's about being able to actually change the reality and the perception of what others are perceiving from the said reality that they're actually looking at. So this is very similar to right now inside of, obviously we now have the onset of the metaverse and we have virtual reality, we have video games. I love the metaverse. This is very similar to when you're going, or even books, those were the first ones that when you go into a reality that has been created, you start to try to gain a level of perception. You even kind of immerse yourself into that space. So the best books you've been able to completely immerse yourself. Little House on the Prairie, I'm sure, but the way that the author is continuously representing the scene. Also, you got to notice through time, the stimulus levels change, what became immersive perception for you. For some books, I remember books for me, and still today, it's like, man, I just get totally immersed. But for others, when they look at books, it's like, oh, boring. And then for some, they get into this video game, and it's like they're like Star Captain R or playing Toulon, and they dressing like it, they go down to Vegas, costume and everything, and it's just like it's a total immersion. But certain people immerse, different people immerse differently. But as society as a whole, society is always working on its next projection of immersion. And as you know right now, the TVs and things are our number one conduit of immersive content.
Thank you for the thumbs up.
A manipulator of the waveform through time as an is always concerned about things like language, symbolism, things like light, electricity, things like liquid crystal, all that, the stuff that actually determines perception. Now let's go to the ancient times first here. And let's just give an example of this perception.
Oh, good.
Okay? Just from the deepest core most necessarily, because I can bring it all the way back up from here. So here's what I mean by symbolism and perception all the way down to the T. So the map of Yggdrasil, which is in the occult Norse tradition, actually the Druids that were actually in where you're calling the Owl of in Britain, they're Albion, right? So the Albion, right? So in their tradition of the Norse, they have the Yggdrasil as a map to the cosmos and a map to the worlds and also a map to the netherworld. And that is a perfect emulation of also the eye, because since all of this that we're in, as I was explaining before, it's all holographic in many ways. It's all redundant, if you may. So it's you in a universe, you're a universe inside of the universe, inside of the universe, and even the smallest parts of you are micro universes within themselves. And the expression of the universe, so let's say with the I, is going to contain all of the expressions of the world, because the I would mean the gateway to the soul, is the end of the tube in which one comes through in order to perceive the world. So again, when you're coming out of your mother's womb, it's like everything is tubes. You're coming out of tubes. Sound is through tubes. Even the masculine organ is a tube. So here you are, always moving.
He said the dick is a tube.
And
dick tube.
again, when you finally terminate that into today, you even have the TV, which is also a tube. It's an eye. It's a cathode ray tube, because in our eye, in that area that you're seeing right below the white area, is actually it looks like hexagons. They're actually, it's like this hexagonal meshing. You can actually see it when you look at up close imagery of the eye, or microscopic imagery of the eye. So we're actually seeing through a hexagram right now with our real eyes. So when even the external cloned things are created, like the TV, then it's still going to abide by those same principles, because that principle is a dialectic. That principle is y as above, so below. Meaning that the principle itself, once you realize it, it actually works on anything. And that's really the whole of mastery of massive levels of spiritual power even. Is because you start having what's called unwavering faith. And it's really based on that. You know that there's no way that what you're doing can not work, because you're using the same principles in which the original architects, builders, creators, originators, whatever you want to call them today, have used to put all this in place and continuously use that. Like, it's interesting because, you know, we look at the creators and we act like they're like long gone and dead. Like, yeah, our creators, the ancestors, and then we're like, they're long gone. Really, they're like so far ahead, and we're like, you know, we're in their wake. You see what I mean? Like, we're sailing on the waves coming from their boat. So, you know, changing the perception, like, yo, but we're infinite, and that's so weird. It's definitely they're infinite. And so it's not like they're not there and they're not in the space, but who are they? Okay? And I have a statement in relation to that. And it's, offspring is like its parent and contains its parent, but isn't its parent. It's always that paradoxical thing with Earth. It's like, yes and no.
Yeah.
As even us, like my child, right? She is me, she is her mother, and she is herself. So when we're thinking about like the ancestors and the ancients, this is actually really where the difference comes in between what you may call human and humanoid. Because back in the day, the word that was being used for human actually meant to description of many beings that look totally different than us. But the thing that they had in common with us is that they could actually reason. They weren't completely tied into the instinctual nature that is also inside of the reality. There's like a hard-coded firmware of the reality where things that are below a certain octave or frequency, they live exactly, they live on instinct. And instinct is a pre-program from the time it comes out of this little egg. It doesn't even have a development. It already knows what to do, because that's already a wavelength that you may actually move it across, that it's tuned into. While the humanoid is actually able to tune into multiple frequencies or also block other frequencies. So this allows them to do what's called reason, right? Which is basically to be able to guide the boat, to be able to determine where you want to go, and in effect, basically to be able to change your destiny. So if anyone says it's impossible to change your destiny, welcome to the impossible. We're doing it all the time. Something came from nothing. That's called impossible. So this impossible thing, we are even doing it, and we know how to do it, and we're going to continue with it. So even if you're sitting over there right now, you're thinking it's impossible for me to actually understand what this guy is saying. Stick with it, because eventually it's just all going to click. So remember then, that this perception of human and humanoid is a lot more vast in the astral plane than it actually is in our current levels of perception. Our current levels of perception is likened unto what they call, it's like a cast, which is a mold. So someone has cast a spell, but it's a mold. And what this mold is the physical bodies. And the physical bodies that we're using now are over the top of another framework that cannot be seen. Because remember, masters of the waveform control how things look. So one of the goals here recently, and I say recently because it's been trillions of years, but one of the goals recently has been to reduce the amount of conflict and quarreling by actually making the beings look more similar to each other. So this is very simple to understand. It's like when you go in nature, there are beings there that are diametrically opposed to each other. One's predator, the other one is prey. However, if they looked identical to each other and were also close to the same size, then they would actually probably not have the predator and prey thing going on. So even in history, when the more different we look, the more conflicts actually occur. Now, you can also see these conflicts as being the preliminary stage of integration. Meaning that generally when a conqueror comes, it then integrates with whatever it conquered, and then you get an offspring of the conqueror and the conqueror and the conquered in the same body, which actually still would lead to certain levels of conflict. So many of us or all of us, you'll see that very clearly, are blended with two opposite poles that normally are in conflict with each other. But because we are created as supreme beings, we've been created with a neutral area. Whether we use it or not is another thing. But we've been created with a neutral zone, an evangel, if you may, a messiah is what they would call it, inside of our consciousness that belongs to us, that allows us to begin to basically play not only the role of the judge, but also the role of the God or the Godhead. So very clearly, we've seen how, just as an example, the masters of the waveform will maneuver symbolism, but still allow it to be replete to every single aspect of how the blueprint functions. However, there's another phenomenon that I wanted to mention before we begin, and that's that new words are created when new words are created to explain the same thing, it becomes the child of that thing. And it changes. Okay, now, this is just one that cannot be looked over as a master scholar, especially in the context of spiritual awareness, cosmology, etc. When the name of something changes, the name itself can add on additional parts that actually almost create a chimera of what it was before. So it's the same thing that would happen if when you birth a child, now it still has its own uniqueness too, so it's going to come out a bit different.
Thank you.
So that's how languages, especially words of power, work. That anytime there's a new word created to try to explain the same thing, and we're not using the same ancient word anymore,
right,
there becomes a metamorphosis of that word, and so thus the energy metamorphosizes. So it becomes like the child of that energy, and that's what can make things so confusing. And another good example of that, just to recap here, is how we saw Shukra, which is the being all the way on the left, also known these days as Venus, which is actually, again, some type of reptilian, mammalian mother goddess, morphed to a size, I guess that's about a size 4, size 5, and then completely have a sex change and leave from a very pleasant paradise-looking place to what clearly looks destitute and barren, all within a few hundred years. So we get Shukra, then Venus, then Lucifer. And all of those words are used to explain the same thing, but as you can see clearly, when the new words are created, they take on somewhat of a different form, and there's a metamorphosis. So they can be seen to be children or offspring of those original energies.
Now, what's interesting is that someone could try to come in and say, well, no, they're not a part of that family. They're not a part of that bloodline. And none of that actually makes any sense since we're all needing each other. And I'm going to explain that very clearly here. That
Needing, like I'm a massage therapist.
Is actually KNEAD, which actually refers to what you would do with bread when you start squeezing it and pushing it together, right? So this is symbolic to the hermetic sealed vacuum that we find ourselves in right now as spirits. Not only the body, but also our world, where we're all in here together kind of getting squeezed or needed in order to actually produce something. So let's make a few things very clear before I jump into that, because that's actually how things are actually created, because we need each other. So even though you'll find these folks beefing, male and female alike, they still need each other in order to create. So when you ever want to ask yourself, well, why don't they end it already? Or why doesn't Jesus come back? And you should already know that if you expect a man to come up back and clean up anything, then you got to be a fool. A woman, you probably would be expecting a woman Messiah before you expect a male Messiah. You know, that's one of my astrological metaphysical.
Well, the love versus the pub, patriarch, matriarch, hello.
On the deep level,
Messiah.
We have to realize first, again, when the ancients are talking about certain things, let's get a full perspective of the symbolism and the essence of what they're referring to. So the first thing that we're going to do that with is the word heaven, or basically this place heaven. Where is heaven, or where is as above? Yeah. Because some want to sync that word heaven with haven and then go off into, you know, all this different levels of awareness between the etymology of the word, but just directly, where is this place called heaven? Because it clearly seems like, because they're saying as above, so below, not necessarily as below, so above. It means that whatever is going on in heaven actually affects earth. But we would have to determine where this place is. Yeah. And so when we zoom out for just one moment, I want you to imagine that it's highly possible, from what I've now come to discern, that when in the ancient and occult writings they talk about a boat, and they keep talking about these boats, what they're actually talking about is earth. I want you to imagine for one moment that, and I don't know how we miss this. Like every time I just feel like I'm just in the world, and the joke's on me, and maybe all this is just running, right? It's all the simulator, because I be seeing something like, how did we not get this? Notice how if you dig really deep, generally anywhere you're at, you'll hit water.
Yeah.
Right? And we already know that even though the water is thinner, as you go up in the air, there's still water. So it's like we're always in water.
Yes.
But we know there's also a sea level, and then there's this thing actually that our ancestors referred to as the living water. There seemed to be like this classification of water now. Like I thought it was just, you know, Dasani, Pellegrino, hydrogen water, but no, it seems that the ancestors were into that too, and they've come up with this thing called living waters, which they said was the beginning of the netherworld. And they demarked that the living waters were actually the ocean, but there were other waters in the sky. Right? Yeah. And then the deeper you go into the earth, you hit all these rivers or more water. So it's kind of like then if you were like on Earth, you're on like one huge cruise ship.
Yeah.
I know some of y'all trying to figure out where the buffet is, but serious, it's like you're literally in this space and you're actually floating in this space.
Yes.
Now, because we know this space is infinite, then we can already gather that we're floating in infinite space.
Yes.
So when our ancestors referred to heaven, what they were actually saying is basically any unreachable space, or any space that is generally unreachable or difficult to traverse.
Traverse.
And that actually made up 3 different places for our ancestors. One of them was the sky.
Okay.
That the ancestors proficiently said that there are, in fact, worlds that are in the sky, but they're made out of a different material, a different vibrational frequency. And for the frequency that we're in order for us to go there, we have to leave our body. i.e. go to heaven. And it was an unreachable place by the physical body. They also talk about the sea being also heaven. It is very clear in many texts that when they're referring to heaven, they're actually referring to the sea, and that there is an entire show going on in the sea right now. In the deep.
Sea.
Entire realms, kingdoms, beings, vast knowledge, intellect, the whole nine.
Yeah.
But this place was also seen to be a heaven because you, as a landlubber, can't go there.
Yeah.
They say even from the level of how much we've discovered space, quote unquote, we've discovered less within the depths of the ocean.
That's the problem.
Also known as the Abzu, also known by many ancient terms, right? So very specifically, we want to see very clearly that this notion that we may be on a boat, i.e. a turtle, if you may, is not really far-fetched. And then moving from there, what we'll do is we now will say, well, who lives in these spaces? Because, one more, excuse me. There's one more space that our ancestors also called heaven, and this is a space that we're now calling the astral plane. And the onset to the first level of the astral plane is generally the dream world. So you're very familiar with this place, just like you're very familiar with the ocean, just like if you went and jumped into a balloon, you would be very familiar with the sky. So these are all places that based on your vibratory frequency, you can interweave with and you can intermesh with. And in fact, because you're hyperdimensional, you actually have some stake, like literally like an inheritance, like a lot. Remember, inheritance is generally land, right? It's like you get a chance to own the same land that your parents had. So on all these realms, you got land. You also have a vehicle that corresponds to all these spaces that is remote controlled. And we talked about this last week. But it's remote control from the consciousness, and for most people, that vehicle is laying covered somewhere, probably in the desert. And it only takes for them to think of it and keep dialing into it to access the bridge of their ship in order to call their ship, because that's how we operated. We used another form of ourselves to move around through different spaces to bring us things from those spaces, right? So this is also known as my term I'm getting in is called angelics. So who lives in the sky, who lives in the sea, and who lives in the astral plane? Because these spaces are all populated respectively, and they're known to our ancestors as being the heavens. So diving right into this, what I would have to ask though is, what is the beat? Because all these places sound so amazing.
Is it chicken? Vodka sauce, the onion, and some other man.
So I would have to ask, what?
I'm hungry.
And first I wanted to explain so that it becomes very clear to you of what the purpose of conflict is that since we've already come to a conclusion that we're on a boat, you can imagine the difference between, since we got to go somewhere, like we're moving through the cosmos,
we gotta go, guys.
keep going,
Let's go.
right? And so you can imagine that, maybe in ancient times, our system of propulsion was riding the galactic winds. So we would open up our sails, and then we would ride through the cosmos using the galactic winds coming from the stars to eventually visit and generally, what's the term I want to use?
I'm the best sandwich maker
I guess the term
you
is
ever
panspermia,
fucking had in
but
your
what
life.
it refers to is basically seed any world you go to. And it's very clear to see that even in the word semen, that is the whole purpose, is to actually go and explore all these different spaces and then
cavernous. I'm
in that
cavernous.
space with the materials that are there.
I'm
Or leave it
cavernous.
G-rated like that. Okay? So
Cabernet.
metaphorically in this boat though, sails were great, but let's say later on we start using a different form of propulsion. Very similar to how we're doing right now. We could use the wind and the wind's power. We can use the sun and the sun's power, but we choose to build these micro systems that are basically replicas of those things, very bad replicas to be exact too. And then those things are actually creating the same type, or they're creating an energy, but they're creating that energy through conflict. But this is the source of propulsion. So I'd be willing to say that the source of propulsion right now for this boat that we're on is actually the conflicts between the two primordial forces that were utilized to develop the actual spaces that we're in, i.e. the seraphim and the cherubim, i.e. Ra and Nu, i.e. fire and water.
Wow.
The churners of the waters of life.
Yes.
Okay? The churners of the water of life. So it turns out that this story that I'm actually explaining to you in 2021 speak is not new. It's not actually an invention or me just making up stuff. Right here, and I will come through this in an entirely different way. Like I come through this knowledge in an entirely different way and find out the knowledge is exactly true and already been talked about. So that's just the verification of the knowledge. But what the ancient texts say specifically is that
this is
to
me.
churn the milk.
Yes.
There's a lot of milky-like substances that are used to create life. If
That's
you didn't
dirty.
notice. So to churn the milk, though, it was seen that there needed to be these two opposing forces, i.e. the angels and the demons, i.e. was that Asuras and the Ahuras, i.e. the seraphim and the cherubim, i.e. the fire, the water, Ra and Nu, meaning the positive and the negative. This is an organic generator, the source of generation. So when, people want to create, like the technology is the advanced one, the technology is not the advanced one. The physical technology, the wires, all that stuff, that's not the advanced one. Those things are actually taken directly from and replicated from the original systems and how they function. And we actually are living in one of them. And so this diagram that you're actually seeing here on the screen is pretty much how our body works. And that hole in the middle is actually our spine. And when the left and the right hemispheres of our consciousness begin to churn in their yin-yang like logical / spiritual flow, then they create life. And that's what I was saying before, is that creating life is what we were created for. That's why we are in life. And so if you wanted to do something else in your life, you have to first adapt to the awareness of what you're actually here for in the first place. And then what you also see is the reason why we create life. Because somebody, well, why are we doing that? To preserve existence at this level, which is actually a miraculous achievement for us to be here.
I really don't give a damn, to be honest.
From nothing.
I really don't.
You know what I mean? They always thought we started from the bottom,
nice.
now we're here. This is like, we started from nothing for real, all of us. And then now we're here. And so to get to complaining about that seems a little bit silly. But very directly on this particular diagram, as we're calling it, we're actually paying attention to certain forms. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But just remember, if you wanted to see this, you're estranged, you're scientific, you would actually, have to kind of digest this first, just from a simple elemental level, positive and negative. These are the churners of the waters of life. Okay? Now, for those of us who, we like it straight, like give it to me just how it is, we have to go into the ancient knowledge, because we're not sitting here with this, fictitious GUI over our face, imagining that everybody is a clay body that life was breathed into, and that there's absolutely nothing underneath the hood. It's like, yo, pop the hood. Let me see what you got up into that cherubim seraphim body of yours. And then what you'll see is that now what you're looking at is some depictions and emulations of the cherubim throughout history. Right? And her story.
Right, her story. Yeah.
And it's just basically showing that there is a dialectic here. There's two primary life forms that all of humanity is originating from. But originating from in a way of what I was explaining earlier with this. That as you get further and further into this, this is what even in the Hindu text, have you ever noticed how they just be going in with the symbolism? It's like they got a cow, donkey, goat, fox, peacock kid.
Yes!
Around. You see what I mean? It's
Donkey, goat, peacock
what
kid,
yes.
yes.
To explain. And this is what they're trying to
That's
explain.
my
They're
baby.
trying to really give you insight on the genetic mixtures as we keep going here.
Yes.
And as you know,
Let's
the
keep
animals
going.
and every single thing that we're living in, the air, the elements, all this is involved in the composition of what we're calling now the human being.
Yeah, the being.
But spirituality still
Like the
is the study
being.
of spirits, and I could be called a spiritualist. I could be called an occultist. So this means that this is my study. I call it being a metaphysician.
Okay.
And so in this case, that means I would need to be a little bit more. I can't just tell you, well, you got a neck ache. I got to be able to tell you, well, you know, your lumbar is crooked. It looks like you're putting too much pressure on your third disc of your spine. Looks like you got to, I got to be able to, looks like your chakra is emitting,
Right.
a different color than it's supposed to. It looks like, so I have to be able to analyze the situation and then from there begin to determine what I'm dealing with. But if I fail to look at the evidence, then I'm not only going to hurt somebody, I'm always going to be practicing.
Yes, the practice.
I'm never going to be a master. I'm always going to be
Exactly.
practicing. I'm just
Fuck the
guessing.
practice. Yeah, no.
And that's what folks be doing. They just guessing.
Yeah, I don't like that shit. That's what I don't fuck with doing, is Western bullshit.
I can see the passion of they want to know. So by all means, yes, this knowledge
Ooh,
needs
thank
to
you,
reach
right
them
now.
so they can know because they have a passion to keep
I'm having a great night, Michael. How are
delivering knowledge and
you?
information.
You said you
but
did put
they
that thumb
also
on my
have
butt.
to- we'll fake it until we make it.
Let me
though. We'll
see.
just tell all out lies, stories, even just to keep everything going when,
Thumb up,
maybe they don't know the truth yet. And so tonight and all the time, because this is for everyone here that has been in Tribe for at least 3 to 4 months, this is nothing new. It is more refined, so that's always pleasant. But this, what we're seeing, we've seen this before in another scenario. So again, when you're discerning if someone is connected, if they actually are really bringing you something,
There we go.
then you got to be able to do that with something. You need to have a tool of measurement. So that's going to be you at this stage. It's going to be how much you know. So you're going to be able to authenticate, because sometimes I read some ancient works and I can tell when there's going to be gems, because I can tell right away if a person really knows the truth or not, or whether they're just caught up in a different part of the lower levels of the initiation. And we're going to be talking about that here in a minute. Maybe they never even graduated or finalized the initiation before they ran off and teach. You see that all the time. They're so starved for the attention, which is something that happens to us if we're, when we're young, maybe your father's missing, your mother's missing, maybe your family was griping and grumbling, maybe your parents got divorced, all the different things that happen to where we feel like that we need attention. And so before they even graduate the course, they just go run out there and start becoming teachers in this knowledge and this wisdom without actually knowing about it completely themselves, never finalizing their tutelage. So for me, it's really about, as I said before, I'm not this master guru sitting here in front of you telling you that I've been through all of this already and here it is. Now I'm going to tell you how to do it.
Right.
What I'm explaining to you is that this is the journey that I'm on in real time right now.
Right now.
And I've had experiences to authenticate that what I'm bringing to you is exact.
Yep.
And I'm doing that so that way we can keep opening up a vista that may offer a greater level of potential for us than what is actually going on currently in the reality with Project Lockdown, basically.
Okay.
You see what I mean? So it's like now is the time to activate these powers. But if we don't know what we're activating, and we don't know that we even need to know how to deactivate sometimes, and that we need a ground, and if we're not going to treat this like it's a real tutelage, this is a school. Like Socrates, Plato, all these people, these Therians and all that. This was serious. Pythagoras, etc. This is serious. This was serious to them. So speaking of serious,
it's serious to me.
That's exactly what it was. Notice how, did we not catch how Sirius does basically this? You see
Every
how
day.
that forms 3?
Every
Just
day
take
is
a look
amazing.
at it again.
Thank you for
They already
asking.
proved that Sirius and that, the star system out there called weight. Right? So this is the counterbalance for the cosmos. This is what's used to balance out the scales. So it shows once again that this yin yang, positive, negative, Ranu, this energy is actually known throughout the cosmos to be how things are created. So this is why when our ancestors, when they're talking about, we came from Sirius, and there's something going on in Sirius, and so many of these angels, the air cherubim, they come from Sirius. This is also what they're referring to. It's like a system in itself of generative. It's a generative system of creation, first through energy and then through awareness. This is why now the strongest AI they have now that's open to the public is called Siri. So supposed to be calling on Sirius all day. Hey Sirius, hey Sirius, hey Sirius. You sound like if I was an alien and I came here, all this would seem weird. Everybody wearing masks. They talking about these devices, talking about hey Sirius. This looks like Star Wars to me. So, but you see how perception is, right? Like it's even like now when you see somebody in VR and you're not in VR, it look wow. It'd be like they're touching on the air and all this stuff. Imagine, being a voyeur and just showing up in one of those stations and seeing all that goes on. Do you see how weird that really looks? Do you see how weird we really are, right? But we want to normalize that because that makes us feel comfortable. But what at times we would have to do is realize that, if we understood just a little bit more about ourselves, to realize that, hey, it looks like that your ancestors, notice how the image on the right, which is actually, I think that's Amun, which actually is in itself a cow, or it has like a cow, it's a mammal face, but it's that master of perception that has carved that has also made it look like a cobra. So at a glance on the right, the image will look like a cobra at first with another cobra on top of his head. But then when you kind of focus your eyes, you'll see, oh no, that's a calf of some sort. And it's because these are all not only real energies, but they're also symbols of the priestcraft in itself. This, of course, is Seraphim. So it's just that awareness that the top level to all of this, if you're not bottom feeding into just the derivatives, the lower levels of Rule 30, you're just gonna go right to the sources or close enough to the source to kind of see how things come into play and how they were formulated. And then because you'll have a direct image of how things started and how they were created, you'll just see that image keeps repeating itself. As I said before, even if it goes from humanoid to human, or human to humanoid, or man to mankind, underneath all of that are still the same components of how things function in the same purpose. So let's keep going here. So we have a great image here again of cherubim, as you're seeing here, and seraphim, just as a quick acknowledgement that the ancestors referred to across all cultures, this progeny, this interaction between what now people are calling aliens in our world. And they're not aliens, they're actually the ancestors. So they should have called it ancient ancestors rather than ancient aliens. Now, there are ways though, because see, your environment definitely determines your mode of behavior. Your environment determines your mode of behavior. So the thing about, even on the Syrian level, the difference between a cherubim and seraphim is like the difference between fire and water. It's like the difference between a being that lives in a space, like in this case, seraphim live in what we would call the spiritual realm. So every single thing that they deal with, it generally has something to do with light, sound, tone, vibrations, those kind of things, because those are the things that those are the tools of their reality, and that's the framework that they live in. So if all of a sudden you are propelled into the world of the seraphim,
I'm full, and that was yummy. And I